Hey everybody, it's Parleet, and today we're taking a look at Millennia, the upcoming 4X title developed by the folks over at C-Prompt Games, published by Paradox Interactive. You might recognize that second name, but if you haven't heard of C-Prompt Games, their studio includes people who worked on everything from Age of Mythology to StarCraft to Diablo and much more, so it's safe to say that the game's in really good hands. Thanks to them and Paradox, I was able to play some really early versions of this turn-based 4X game, and I wanted to share everything I know so you know exactly why I'm excited for this one. Heads up that I only have a few very early screenshots and a trailer that I can show, because the game is in a really early state right now, but I do have a lot of in-depth information to share about the game's systems and mechanics that I'll be able to highlight using said assets. Again, I was playing a very early build of the game, and the visuals you'll see today are also from an early build, so you can expect things to change between now and release, but you can also expect a lot more coverage on this channel to keep up to date. If you're interested in that, you might want to consider subscribing, or at least letting me know by hitting the like button and leaving a comment. Now, with no more time to waste and with timestamps down below, let's begin. Define the ages: history, fantasy, and sci-fi. One of the biggest immediate draws and the core concept around which a large part of the game revolves is the ability to choose how humanity progresses through history. I know that sounds familiar, but with Millennia, you'll be racing against your counterparts to determine not just your own future with your decisions, but that of every other playing faction too. Your path through history here, while linear, isn't predetermined. Sure, you go from the Stone Age to the Bronze Age as a first step, but after that, things start to open up, and the ages are defined in broader ways, encompassing things like the Age of Kings, full of royalty and religion, the Age of Heroes with its titular heroic figures and the quests that they can pursue, and so on and so forth. As you can probably tell, these ages aren't limited by how historians define actual times in human history, and instead are defined by concepts or technologies that don't actually exist, like the steampunk style of the Age of Ether, with buildings in the clouds, and the Age of Utopia with its underwater cities and presumably associated units and improvements. This is where the sci-fi and more fantastical elements come into play, and I haven't even been able to explore the Age of Alchemy and the unique improvements it allows for, or the Age of Heresy and the cults it brings with it, or countless others besides. There are 10 ages in any playthrough from start to finish, but what those 10 ages actually are, well, that depends on how you and your opponents play, and what you choose from a much bigger pool of options each step of the way. Transitioning from one age to another has certain prerequisites. Primarily, you need to complete the research of a certain number of technologies within each age. Typically, this prerequisite number is half or less than half of the total number of technologies available in the age, so you're able to pick and choose what you prioritize for your people, and if you want to stay in one age for longer or come back and research things you'd skipped when moving forward, you can absolutely do so. Technologies do everything from unlocking new buildings and units to improving your nation's rate of expansion and even opening up core game mechanics like rushing construction, religion, so on and so forth. So you'll often want to get more than the minimum required tech in an age anyway. Researching more than the minimum in an age will also speed up the transition into the next age, requiring fewer turns to switch over, so there's pros and cons to either approach. Sometimes, especially if you want to transition into a very specific age, you'll need to fulfill additional prerequisites that range from having killed a certain number of enemy units to having discovered a certain number of wonders littered across the map, etc., etc. Sometimes the pursuit of these prerequisites will mean you're waiting in your current age for longer than you'd originally hoped, and this too is a matter of balancing risk and reward. As I'd said earlier, you're not just in control of how your own nation progresses through the ages, but the first one to get through an age will actually lock it as the choice all other factions have to make when they're able to transition into that age. In this way, you can really shape the world at large. There are standard ages, variant ages, crisis ages, and victory ages, each unlocking new mechanics, units, buildings, and powers for you to wield, as well as rules for everyone to keep in mind. Entering into the Age of Iron, for example, is a good time to instigate a revolution to secure a new form of government. But should you fall into the Age of Plague, you might find yourself chasing technologies that unlock the option to create a religion, while also trying to build structures that reduce the chances of an outbreak. Let your imagination run wild with some of the age names revealed in the trailer, from harmony to ignorance to revolutions and more. I'll dive into some more specific mechanics later into the video, but first let's discuss building on the familiar. If you're a fan of games like Civilization, you're in the right place. While the previous section talked a lot about the big core conceit, in this section, I want to briefly talk a little bit about how Millennia is keeping some of that classic 4X DNA intact, but at the same time, innovating at that level too. For starters, you can choose to play as a historical nation or use some limited customization options to make one of your own. Between America, the Aztecs, Brazil, Britain, China, Egypt, France, Germany, Greece, Japan, Persia, Rome, India, the Ottomans, Russia, Spain, Sweden, and the Zulu, there's a fair bit of variety in options. You can see on screen what each of the starting nations offers as a buff, and yes, there's a fair bit of overlap, which says to me the nation selection is more a matter of personal preference than min-maxing strategies, pigeonholing your decision-making process. Once you boot into a game, a lot of familiar elements greet you. A hex-based map, a starting city, starting scout units, so on and so forth. Some of these are going to be extremely familiar. Yes, the hex-based map, for example, has different resources available on different hexes, with each hex providing different amounts of food or production or some other vital resource. And yes, you can send your scout to uncover the fog of war, to find barbarian hostiles, to come across abandoned sites that provide some boon or another, or to find other factions with whom you can war or have diplomatic relations. And yes, cities are able to build buildings and recruit units based on what technologies you've unlocked, with their production taking time based on the per-turn production output of the associated city. Digging a little deeper, though, starts to reveal the differentiators, even among the similarities. The needs of a city. A city has basic needs that must be fulfilled in order for the city to grow. Typically, this need is food, and that holds true in Millennia as well, at least at first. A variety of factors can expand what a city needs. As it grows above a population of 10, for example, you need to start worrying about sanitation. Above a population of 25, you need education. Even before then, at a population of 5, you'll start needing faith and housing. But not all needs are population-based. Adopting certain late-game governments introduces ideological needs. Certain late-game buildings need power, and entering the 9th age will introduce the need for information. As you might be able to tell, some of these needs escalate with population, others with structures, and others still over time, and meeting these needs, as mentioned earlier, will allow a city to grow, while falling short will often cause it to shrink. As with other games in the genre, a larger population means more people to assign to various tiles around the city, and depending on the tile, you might be able to build improvements on it to get more out of it. On the simple side, for example, building a midden helps manage sanitation, while with more complex production chains on hand, a mill can convert wheat or rice grown at a farm into flour, doubling the food value per unit as a result. Between buildings, tiles, and tile improvements, you'll fulfill the needs of the city from both within and without its reach, but there's an additional option available in Millennia that I don't recall seeing in other games in the genre. Towns can be established within the bounds of a city to help expand its domain, and as the town levels up, it can be specialized to bolster the city's output in one way or another. While towns don't have worker assignment or the other usual aspects of city production and management, they act as a supplementary source of production and as a rally point for unit recruitment too. It's an interesting system that encourages sprawling expansion and really feels like a good representation of how small towns would sprout around major cities to fulfill specific needs. Adding towns to a city will also help increase the region's level, which in turn gives access to more advanced structures within the city itself and higher population limits too, which ultimately translates into higher productivity and output. Not only do I mean an output of these various needed goods and services, but also things like production, which determines how quickly a city can build a structure and how quickly it can recruit units, and then there's influence, which determines how quickly the regional borders of a city expand. As you can imagine, the output of a city goes beyond servicing itself. Ultimately, your cities will look to fulfill the needs of a nation. While the cities in Millennia are complex beasts, it's important to remember that you're running a whole nation, with multiple cities each needing to be managed and, of course, greater concerns across and between them. Cities will output familiar resources like wealth and knowledge. The former is used to pay upkeep costs for units, to rush buildings, and to manage trade. The latter is used to make progress through the tech tree and, ultimately, through the ages. Cities also produce improvement points, and these can be used at a national level to build improvements on tiles ranging from the aforementioned mills and farms and middens to docks and fishing boats and presses and hunting camps and many, many more. Naturally, a city needs to assign workers to an improved tile to actually glean benefits from it, but well-placed and planned improvements work in tandem with the cities they've been built for to maximize gain. Cities also produce culture, and every time the culture bar fills up, you can use a cultural power ranging from raising a whole army immediately to forcing truces to establishing towns, and again, much more besides. There's another major category of output from your cities that'll help progress your national goals, and that's the category of domains. There are a total of 6, and in no particular order, they are government, exploration, warfare, engineering, diplomacy, and arts. You don't start with access to all of these domains, only uncovering them as you unlock certain technologies, or build certain structures, or partake in certain behaviors. They are all separate buckets of resources that are accumulated over time as domain XP, and at various times, you'll want to spend that XP to take advantage of special domain-specific abilities. Settlers, for example, aren't a unit you can produce at a city. Instead, you need to spend a certain amount of government domain XP to recruit them. You can use government domain XP to kick off a revolution and install a new government, to suppress foreign religions, and more options unlock as you progress through the ages. The exploration domain allows you to recruit scouts and prospectors without needing to queue them up in your cities, and you can also spend some exploration domain XP to expand regions tile by tile, to spawn ships, and more besides. Under warfare, you can instantly summon certain units or restore a stack's health and morale, or even their movement points. Engineering XP can be spent to produce improvement points and specific units, or to help towns within your nation. Diplomacy XP can be spent to increase vassal integration, to pay barbarians off and remove them without needing military action, to create envoy units who can improve relations with other nations, merchants to help generate wealth with international trade, and much more. The arts, meanwhile, can help reduce unrest in your cities, it can bolster population in a city through immigration, it can help with the adoption and spread of religion, and once again, much more besides. As you progress through the tech tree and the ages, more options get unlocked, and all domains can actually spend some XP to help determine your nation's social fabric after reaching the 5th age. Social fabric is expressed as 6 aspects of your society: organization, insight, tenacity, community, ingenuity, and tolerance, each tied to one of the domains and each providing some form of benefit or another for each point you've increased it by. Social fabric can also be bolstered through national spirits. Every 2nd age will have a variety of national spirits associated with it, categorized by their domains. Unlocking one costs some domain XP, and then within said national spirit, you'll find upgrades for your nation that cost more of that same domain XP. This really lets you shape your nation in various ways, regardless of who you started as. In the interest of gaining certain domain XP, you'll produce certain buildings or pursue certain actions and certain technologies, and that'll really influence how you proceed through the ages. Again, it's important to remember that the core output of a city, whether it's things like food and sanitation, or it's things like knowledge and wealth and culture, or even domain XP, are all the result of a much larger network of intricate production chains. I've touched on this earlier in the video, but I think it's really worth highlighting the complex economic system that Millennia is gunning for. All the core resources from a game mechanics and systems perspective have been more or less described earlier, from wealth to food to sanitation to domain, so on and so forth, and everything else funnels into those top-line resources. Making wheat? Well, that's food. Fish? Also food. Rice? Believe it or not, also food. But some resources can be a little deceptive. Olives, for example, actually generate 1.5 wealth each, despite literally being food. Build a press as a tile improvement, however, and all of a sudden, you can convert 2 olives into 2 oil, which counts as 8 food and 4 wealth. Build a kitchen instead, and those same 2 olives will get turned into 2 delicacies, representing 10 food and 4 luxury. Naturally, things like cost, technology, and population will all determine what you can and cannot pursue at any given time, but I think it's easy to extrapolate how a single resource becomes this complex web and a matter of decision-making too. In the simple case of the humble olive, do you prioritize food and luxury needs, or do you prioritize wealth? What can you afford? What do you actually need? Domain XP? Culture? You decide. Placing and expanding a city appropriately can make such an exponential difference with proper planning as you try to find tiles that can synergize nicely. You can also establish outposts further away from cities, linking the two to gain access to goods around the outpost that a city can't currently reach on its own. And failing self-sufficiency, you can turn to trade. With the right technology and buildings in place, each city can both import and export resources. So yes, you can actually import goods from other cities within your nation to help meet needs across your realm, and you can even import goods from other nations as long as you have good diplomatic relations with them. You can do this all in order to meet needs as is, or you can take it a step further and simply process raw goods that you've imported into more complex ones, which then you can proceed to export or hoard in the interest of improving your people's lives. Further on, you can also invest in merchants to purely generate wealth when positioned appropriately on the map, and these intricate production chains exist not only within each individual city, but between them and between nations too. I can't wait to see how much more complex these production chains get. There are references to things like pop culture being a type of service, I suppose, and all manner of other things on the description in the Steam page. So I really am curious about how this expands further and how many moving parts there are for some of those later stage commodities. Again, this already sounds far more involved than one can usually expect in a game like this, so I'm just curious to see how far they push it. And that seems to be the running theme with Millennia. At surface level, the game feels quite familiar, and then you start digging and you realize, well, hang on a minute, there's a lot of innovation under the hood. From the way it approaches ages and the unlocking of mechanics and game rules, to how it handles needs and resources, to some aspects I haven't even touched on today, like stacking units to make armies to engage in battles, or expeditions that you come across when exploring the map taking multiple turns and decisions to bear fruit, or even innovation and chaos, two sides of a similar coin, bars that fill up to reflect events, technological advances, and decisions made, triggering additional positive and negative events respectively. These are systems that are certainly interesting as well, but I feel like we can revisit Millennia when it's a bit further along and do an even deeper dive. If you'd be interested in that, let me know by leaving a like and a comment down below. And for more strategy and tactics gaming news, reviews, previews, let's plays, and more, don't hesitate to subscribe. Questions, thoughts, opinions? Share them in the comments. And as always, a massive thanks goes out to all of the channel members and patrons who've been supporting the channel on a monthly basis. Y'all keep us alive and running smoothly. And of course, a big old thanks goes out to each and every one of you for watching. Until next time, cheers.